Sell me this pen.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 188th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring the Wolf of Wall Street. Now before we go any further, I'd like to preface this video with a little disclaimer. As many of you may be aware, Jordan Belfort has served his time for the crimes he committed and denounced the actions he took as a stockbroker when he was younger. And at the time of making this video, he has turned his life around significantly. I've seen some people claiming around the internet that some of the business endeavors he's currently engaged in are rather suspect, and they might be. But I'm not here to comment on the merits of his actions since he's been out of prison. Rather, you should keep in mind that this video isn't about current-day Jordan, but rather the Wolf of Wall Street, the man who he once was. So with that out of the way, what we're going to do in this video is talk about those crimes he committed when he was that Wolf of Wall Street, and we'll be using everything we see in the film, as well as information that we aren't given there, so we might understand completely the evil of one of the greatest Wall Street con artists of our time. But before we begin, let's first talk about our sponsor for this video, Delete Me. Everywhere you go now, someone is looking to get your email or your phone number out of you, and while it's often a necessity to give out this information to various people and companies, you never really know whether or not the information you give out to someone is going to stay with them or be used elsewhere. But Vile, where could that information be going, you might be asking yourself? Why, to data brokers, of course. People who buy and sell your information to spammers and scammers, who then bombard you with unwanted emails, text messages, and phone calls. And worse still, with access to your data, they can even steal your identity or make you vulnerable to stalkers. They can find this information in places you wouldn't expect, like by easily accessing military records for active service members and veterans, or even through genealogy websites, which can list all sorts of information about your family members from the youngest to the oldest, which is concerning to say the least. In 2023 alone, the FTC received 5.7 million total fraud and identity theft reports, and those numbers only increase with each passing year, so we could all use a bit more protection in this regard, and Delete Me provides excellent protection from these malefactors. But Delete Me doesn't just work for you to remove any current threats to your information, as they're always on alert for more. And by looking through my data reports, I can see that they found 40 companies who currently have my information and are selling that information to people looking to make my life miserable and expose me to hackers. And unfortunately, I know those numbers are only going to increase. So I'm glad to have Delete Me in my corner to remove my data from these websites. You can enjoy some added protection as well though by going to joindeleteme.com/vile, and when you get there, be sure to use the code VILE at checkout to get 20% off any US consumer packages. That's joindeleteme.com/vile and enter the code VILE at checkout to get 20% off your purchase. Thank you Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Now without further ado, let's begin. Jordan Belfort was born on July 9, 1962, in the Bronx borough of New York City, and according to his novels The Wolf of Wall Street and Catching the Wolf of Wall Street, life for a young Jordan Belfort was a rather pleasant experience. He wasn't raised in the lavish environment that would become his norm in his later years, but he had a loving mother and father who provided their son with a stable environment in a good neighborhood in Bayside, Queens. The only downside seems to have been his father's legendary temper, which earned him the nickname Mad Max, as even the ringing of a telephone could send him into one of his legendary rages. But it seems that Max was more angered at situations, objects, and annoying adults than he was at his children. So by all accounts, Jordan had a good, well-adjusted childhood. As beneficial as such an environment is, Jordan was gifted with another advantage that ensured he had a bright future ahead of him: heightened natural intelligence. Jordan earned straight A's in grade school, and while he got into drugs at the tender age of 11, he still excelled in school and was well on his way to enrolling in medical school, as his mother had dreamed. After completing 4 years in college, Jordan would end up choosing dental school, but during his first day of enrollment, Jordan was made aware by his professor that the golden age of dentistry was over, and while all these new students would end up making a comfortable living, they weren't going to be made as extravagantly wealthy from their profession as they might have hoped, which was a problem for Jordan. But this problem had an easy solution, for Jordan, along with his friend Elliot, had spent their recent summers pursuing a business endeavor of theirs, selling Italian ices, ice creams, and other sundries to beachgoers across New York City, a hustle that managed to clear them $20 grand a summer. While this wasn't a job that would evolve into a career, it would set the stage for what was to come. Aside from this first foray into entrepreneurship with his beachside business, Jordan would end up selling the dental supplies he had to buy for school to a lab room full of his would-be fellow students auction style. And according to Jordan, this was the first time that he felt like a true salesman. After this though, Jordan found himself languishing in his studio apartment, wondering what he was going to do with the rest of his life. And in that moment, he received a call from Elliot, who promised him that if he came to work with him selling meat and seafood at a company called Great American Meat and Seafood, he'd be making the money they made on those beaches in the summer every day of their lives. So Jordan went off to work with Elliot, and here he discovered the inner workings of something that was going to aid him greatly in forming his own financial empire: the art of the scam. What the reverend salesman of Great American Meat and Seafood did was they would go to residential neighborhoods, particularly rich ones, and they'd offer them the following spiel. My name is Jordan, and I deliver meat and seafood to some of your neighbors in the area. I have an overorder on my truck today, and I can't get back to the freezer. I'm willing to sell you everything at cost. Is there any way you can help me out? Of course, this was nothing but a complete lie, and that was the scam. Take overpriced goods to someone's door, offer them a deal which wasn't actually a deal, and make a nice profit from it. With his natural talent for bullshitting people, Jordan quickly became the top salesman at Great American, which led him to believe that he could do much better for himself if he left Great American and started his own company, which he did. Unfortunately for Jordan, after a few natural disasters and some credit mismanagement, Jordan's meat and seafood company would end up driving him into bankruptcy. But as chance would have it, there was another friend waiting in line to inspire Jordan into dipping his toes into a new career field: stock brokerage. Shortly after going bankrupt, a friend of Jordan's by the name of Michael Falk paid a visit to Jordan's home in his Ferrari to tell him how well he'd been doing, making $1 million plus a year as a stockbroker. Jordan knew he had always wanted to be a rich man, and it was at that moment that he knew that this was how he was going to make his fortune. So right off the back of a bankruptcy, which should have disqualified him from becoming a man who handles finances, Jordan secured an interview with L.F. Rothschild through his parents' friend Bob Cohen. And in that interview, Jordan managed to secure a job on the lowest rung of the stockbroking totem pole as a connector by pitching a stock to his interviewer. And within a few hours of his first day at Rothschild, Jordan met a man who fulfilled the vaunted role of being the second corrupting influence in his life: Mark Hanna. To be fair, if it weren't Mark who showed him the ropes, it would have been someone else. But Mark was the senior broker at Rothschild, and during his lunch break, Jordan would learn to appreciate what every yuppie stockbroker on 1980s Wall Street needed to function in their cutthroat world: a healthy appetite for any and all forms of debauchery, like drugs, sex, alcohol, and anything in between. However, Jordan's tenure at L.F. Rothschild wouldn't last long, as Jordan was fortunate enough to begin his career on Wall Street right as the great crash of 1987 occurred, which shuttered L.F. Rothschild and left many an aspiring broker, Jordan included, flat out on their rears. So once again, Jordan found himself in need of work. But this time, he knew exactly what kind of work that he wanted to pursue, which led him to taking up a job at a small-time investment firm known as the Investor Center, as well as other small-time brokerages, companies that fall under the category of over-the-counter brokerages, institutions that dealt heavily in the third corrupting influence of Jordan's life: penny stocks. You see, the average rate of commission for your typical low-level stockbroker lay somewhere in the realm of 1%, which means on $1 million deal, such a broker could expect to earn 10 grand, which is a decent chunk of change no matter who you are. Though that might be the case, earning that money requires that you sell $1 million worth of stock, which for seasoned veterans of the trade is an easy enough feat to accomplish. But for a person just starting out on Wall Street, well, that's a different story. But for a person working at a firm like the Investor Center, the commission rates were 10 to 20% of the trade, which is a sizable amount, but not the 50% rate that the film claimed it was. So a broker selling someone 10 grand worth of stock would net themselves anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 in commission. And if you have the natural talent of a man like Jordan Belfort, that becomes quite the easy feat to accomplish. And Jordan quickly made a name for himself as perhaps the greatest penny stock trader of all time, earning himself millions in the span of a few short months. The only problem with this new profession of his is that it preyed upon the financially illiterate, the postmen and plumbers of a pre-internet era who were no more knowledgeable about trading stocks than they were about quantum physics. But for a man like Jordan, who had already cut his teeth scamming the pants off of unsuspecting citizens during his meat selling days, that was no issue. But of course, just like with the meat and seafood business though, Jordan quickly realized he could cut out the middleman and start making a fortune with his own brokerage. And so he began his fledgling firm that would eventually come to be known as Straton Oakmont, the successor to the company Straton Securities that was able to deal in both the traditional exchange-based trades that larger firms dealt in and the much less regulated over-the-counter penny stock trades that small firms like the Investor Center pushed. Now, at the time Jordan started his brokerage, he had done a few illegal and debaucherous things, like selling items on a beach without a vending license, which is really no big deal, conning people out of their hard-earned cash by scamming them with inflated meat and seafood prices, engaging in the use of illicit substances, and cheating on his wife, and conning people out of their hard-earned cash by selling them cheap stocks that were more liable to take a header than they were to shoot to the moon. But Straton was a whole different animal. At Straton, Jordan's primary means of enriching himself involved the use of what he called rat holes, people who would buy up large blocks of shares in their name from small-time companies with market caps of under $100 million on behalf of Jordan and Straton. With these sizable holdings in place, Jordan would instruct his brokers to relentlessly call rich and middle-class people, using high-pressure sales tactics to pump up the price of said stock. And after they had made these sales, they would conveniently refuse to answer the phone calls of investors looking to offload their holdings until the rat holes could sell their shares when the market peaked, pouring money directly into the pockets of Jordan and his cronies, while everyone else they had pushed these stocks onto came out with much less cash than they had put in. But with the added benefit of owning a firm that could also deal in stocks listed on larger exchanges, Jordan was able to make even more profit by manipulating IPOs, or initial public offerings, which is a price that a company is placed at when it's first listed on a public exchange. Similar to the penny stocks, Jordan would have rat holes buy up large swaths of these IPOs the moment they went public, and then he would instruct his brokers to push this stock to anyone they could to accomplish exactly the same thing he did with the penny stocks. Only with these publicly traded stocks, he had the added benefit of everyday investors seeing the news of whichever stock he was pushing surge in price, which only helped to drive the price further as more people also bought into this stock. What this resulted in was millions upon millions of dollars being made for Jordan and his Stratonites, while thousands of others found themselves faced with the cold hard reality of losing thousands, or perhaps even millions of dollars, by buying into Jordan's well-oiled pump and dump machine. This is one of the crucial components of Jordan's crimes that both Jordan's books and the film failed to emphasize to a proper degree, as though they both touch on the fact that what Jordan was doing was highly illegal and defrauded thousands out of their hard-earned money. Unfortunately, they gloss over the scale of exactly what happened. Some of the people affected by Jordan's antics were immensely rich, and so their Straton-based losses were much easier to suffer. But even so, no one deserves to be scammed out of their earnings, especially not the people who weren't fortunate enough to be able to stomach a multi-thousand-dollar loss. And the sad truth of Jordan's actions is that even to this day, there are people who are still reeling from the losses they incurred from investing in Straton Oakmont, people who lost their homes, their families, and even their jobs because they got caught up in his schemes. However, it should be said that every single one of us is ultimately responsible for the choices we make. But in this case, people were making choices based on false or misleading information that they couldn't have accounted for. So while it might be true that whoever chose to do business with Straton made that choice, they made that choice under false pretenses, and all the blame should be placed upon Jordan and his cronies for the suffering they endured. Now this is where the bulk of the evil of Jordan Belfort lies, in the depredation of thousands of his clients. But his clients weren't the only people to suffer in this scenario, as many of his brokers came out the other side of Straton far worse off than when they found it. Again, a person's choices are their own, but there's one thing in particular that places more of the blame for what occurred at Straton on Jordan and those closest to him, rather than on the individual that chose to partake in their debauchery, something that Jordan openly admitted in his books, that Straton Oakmont was essentially a cult. Here's what Jordan explained to his handlers about Straton when he was cooperating with the government. "You're saying Straton was a cult?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, Michelle. Why do you think it was so hard to penetrate?" Jordan looked over at Agent Coleman. "How many doors you think you knocked on over the years?" "Just a ballpark." "At least 50, he replied. "Probably more. And every last one of them was slammed in your face, right?" "Pretty much. No one would talk to me. A big part of that was that everyone was making so much money, no one wanted to upset the apple cart. But it was more than that. What was at the very core of it was protecting the Straton way of life. That's what everyone was doing. Protecting the life." Define the life. Well, among other things, it meant driving the fanciest car, eating at the hottest restaurants, giving the biggest tips, wearing the finest clothes. I mean, we did everything together. We spent every waking moment together. And not just at work, but at home too. I looked at Michelle, staring into her black as night eyes. That's why Straton was a cult, Michelle. It was all for one and one for all, and lots for oneself, of course. And there were no outsiders around, ever. See, above all, it's my ability to speak before the crowd giving sales meetings to the Stratonites that was at the heart of my success. It's what kept the pump going all those years, despite all the regulatory problems we were having. The meetings? Yes, the meetings. It's what separates, or should I say separated Straton from every brokerage firm in America. Twice a day I would stand before the boardroom and preach to the brokers. No one on Wall Street had done that before. Occasionally, a brokerage firm would bring in a guest speaker, someone like an Anthony Robbins type, but it was always a one-shot deal, not as part of a program. And that's a complete waste of time. To do it once. If you want results, you have to do it every day. And if you really want results, you have to do it twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Then miracles can happen. But of course, I wasn't aware of that back in my Great American days, although I will tell you that the first meeting I gave was a real eye-opener. It took place inside the warehouse in Forest Hills, Queens. There were 20 salesmen there, most of them in their early 30s. They were all dressed in jeans and sneakers, trying to look like truck drivers. They were gathered around in a circle, and I was standing at the center. At first, I started speaking slowly, talking about the quality of the food, how amazing it was, how there was nothing else like it, and how lucky our customers were to have access to it. In hindsight, I was laying the foundation for a cult, although back then, I was doing it without even knowing it. And the fact that Agent Coleman held up his hand. What do you mean, laying the foundation for a cult? I looked at Coleman and said, let me put it this way. At the heart of any cult, whether it's Straton Oakmont, or Great American, or those crazy Branch Davidians from Waco, Texas, is the fundamental belief that, in spite of what the rest of the world might be saying about them, everyone else is crazy, and they're sane. And, without exception, it always starts with a belief in the justness of their cause. With Muslim extremists, it's a warped interpretation of the Quran. With the Branch Davidians, it's a warped interpretation of the Bible. And at Straton, it was the boardroom itself, the great equalizer in an otherwise unfair world. In other words, it didn't matter what family you were born into, or how limited your education was, or how low your IQ was. Once you stepped into the Straton boardroom, all that was behind you. You became equalized. You could make as much money as the most powerful CEO in America. All cults draw their power by advancing a concept like that they have some sort of one-up with the world. With Great American, it was having food you couldn't get in the supermarket. And with Straton, it was the promise of becoming rich, in spite of the fact that you were a high school dropout who deserved to be working the checkout line at 7-Eleven. That's why I said before, give them to me young and stupid, young and naive, because they make much better cult members. That's right. What you see playing out in the film in the Straton boardroom is the behavior of fanatical cultists pining to gain the favor of a financial god. And in pursuit of gaining that favor, many of these people would develop crippling drug addictions, severe emotional and mental damage, and even in some cases, physical harm. And there's also multiple instances of people who took their own lives for one reason or another because of the goings-on at Straton Oakmont. Something that Jordan also admitted in his books. But it was not just the brokers themselves who suffered, but their loved ones as well. Mothers and fathers who had to watch their children become raging drug addicts, husbands and wives who had to contend with their spouses' frequent infidelities, and children who had to watch their parents engaging in all this debauchery and ruining themselves right before their eyes. Even Jordan's family wasn't safe from the monster he became, as there was a point at the height of his drug addiction where he kicked his wife down a staircase and attempted to make off with their daughter when she threatened to take his kids from him, peeling out of his home with his daughter unbuckled in the front seat of his car as he smashed into a pillar making his escape, an account of which that were given in the film, but in a much more toned-down form. How many marriages, like Jordan's, were utterly destroyed because of Straton Oakmont and Jordan Belfort? How many men and women who were lured into this cult of currency found themselves behind bars? How many lives were intentionally or unintentionally harmed as they carved a path of destruction with their decadent antics everywhere they went? Too many to count. And if what Jordan and his cronies did to his clients was the height of his evil actions, then what he did to those who worked for him, and by proxy their families, has to at least come close to, if not equal the suffering that he caused to those he scammed. Something that many people took issue with both the film, as well as Jordan's books, is how much they both downplayed who he was and what he did. And indeed, many people have watched The Wolf of Wall Street and found within Jordan Belfort a financial wizard of a hero that they could glorify and attempt to imitate. And if the end of the film, and Jordan's current profession of selling his financial wisdom to others is any indicator, there will always be a market for manipulating downtrodden and vulnerable people who glorify the high life and wish to obtain even a hint of the debaucherous decadence that Jordan and those around him managed to achieve. But make no mistake, who Jordan was and what he did was abhorrent and utterly reprehensible. He may not have been holding people at gunpoint and robbing banks, but he stole more with his words than any man with a gun could have ever dreamed of taking. And he corrupted hundreds, if not thousands of people in the process, ruining and destroying so many lives as he attempted to make his that of a king. As we learned, Jordan himself may have been corrupted, and with that in mind, we can also lay the blame on those who made this great corrupter into that great corrupter. But to do what Jordan did requires a conscious effort to harm people without caring the slightest about it. And for that, we can place a great deal of blame squarely on Jordan's shoulders. In his books, Jordan makes the claim that he wasn't and isn't a sociopath. And while that's debatable considering his complete willingness to throw any shred of empathy to the wayside when engaging in his scummy business practices, that might actually be the truth. For if Jordan is a sociopath, then every single one of the people who ended up working for him were also sociopaths, and that simply cannot be true. What is true, though, is a notion that has been prevalent in our society for thousands of years, that power and greed are some of, if not the greatest corruptors in this world. And while Jordan and those who did his dirty work were only a symptom of those great corrupting forces, we can say without a doubt that who the Wolf of Wall Street was, and anyone who looks to imitate him, flourish under a brand of evil that is all too real. You don't start out on the dark side of the Force. The problem is that you become desensitized to things. You cross over the line a tiny bit, and nothing bad happens. So you figure it's okay to step over again. Except this time, you step a bit further. It's human nature to do that whether you're an action junkie, or adrenaline junkie, or even if you're not a junkie at all, and you're simply dipping your foot into a piping hot bathtub. At first you can't keep your toe in, because the water's too hot. And then, a minute later, your whole body is submerged, and the water feels just fine. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on the Wolf of Wall Street? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.